This is The Express with Gary Allen, your 360-degree view of the world. Now, here's your host, Gary Allen.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Express. I hope everybody's great since the last time we got together. By the way, EW, I love that Luck Be My Lady Tonight by Frank Sinatra. That's a great lead-in, I got to tell you that. Thank you so much for that. Before we get to our guest, and I believe she's on the line, Miss Becki Saltzman, just reminding everybody, if you want to catch me on Facebook, it's Gary Allen, A-L-A-N. This show, along with all my other past shows, are on youtube.com at Gary Allen The Express. This program repeats itself Thursday night at 7 p.m. on diversitybroadcastnetwork.com, as well as progressivevoices.com. And in the not-too-distant future, because I'm just getting ready to sign the contract now, you'll be able to hear the shows on 24/7 The Sound, and a few other goodies are coming a long way. And we're about a week to 10 days away from the website, finally, after all these months of being done. So I'm very, very excited about that. Baseball season just started. I think my Phillies won the other day, so we're going to break up that group. Anyway, let's get to tonight's show, and I want to thank all of you out there, first of all, for taking a few minutes out of your day to join me here on The Express. I really do appreciate that. Randy, I know you're probably tuning in at some point or another. And EW, thank you so much for being back there with all the bells and whistles that are going off and on all night long. My guest tonight is an extraordinary young lady. Her name is Becki Saltzman. She's the author of Living Curiously. Becki is a curiosity consultant, an assumption buster, and an idea generator. She holds a master's degree in behavioral science from the Washington University in St. Louis and has spent the last 2 decades studying curiosity and the role it plays in adventure and insights, problem solving, idea generation, sales, and ideal lifestyle design. She's the author of Arousing the Bi-Curious. She loves great travel adventures and crowded dance floors and brown drinks. Okay, I'm going to start off because I didn't realize brown drink. Which brown drinks, Becki? Is Becki there, EW?
It shows her there.
Becki, are you there? Can you hear me?
Well, you know what we can do to fix that? We'll do a simple callback, right?
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it.
But of course.
All right. Well, while you're doing that, I will carry on.
Hi, this is Becki Saltzman. I'm sorry I can't take your call.
All right. Well, we'll just have to wait, and she'll call us, I'm sure. But at any particular rate, like I said, baseball season just started, and the NBA season is winding down. Your San Antonio Spurs, I believe, are in contention. Oh, there she is. Hello, Becki. How are you, darling?
I am well, thanks. How are you? I heard you were asking about brown drinks, and
yes, because I know I read this the other day, but okay, which brown drinks and how brown?
Okay, so it depends on what time of day. 8:00 in the morning, or 4:01 in the afternoon.
Well, I would assume that if it's 8:00 in the morning, we're talking a cup of Joe.
Cup of Joe, right?
For those of you that are not familiar with that, 4:00 in the afternoon. Martini.
A nice añejo tequila or a very good whiskey or scotch, but no vodka, no gin, nothing white.
You want to know something? And a couple of years ago, I worked for a part-time job. I worked in a liquor store. And I got to tell you something. Everybody who I ever talked to, unless you're from England and even a lot of English people, gin tastes terrible.
It's the mean drink.
Oh.
I mean, you know, it'll do in a pinch, but it's really, and I should add beer, a good microbrew. So anything brown, it's brown drinks, crowded dance floors and brown drinks.
You want to know something, and I know my listeners they probably will believe this. I was never a serious heavy drinker in any way, shape, or form. I like my scotch. I like my single malt scotch, Glenfiddich, something like that. My father liked Chivas Regal, that's tough to take at times, depending upon who you are. But I haven't touched a drink of alcohol 5 years.
Really? That's very healthy of you.
Well, it wasn't because of my health, and it wasn't because I was going to AA meetings or that I had a problem. It's just that I lived in Vegas for a long period of time in my life. I was an
Mm-hmm.
entertainer, and I got the best advice from another entertainer. If you don't drink to begin with, or you're a light drinker, stop drinking altogether. I don't think a lot of people realize this, but there's a certain group of people that run the hotels and they frown on alcoholism, even though that's what they're pushing. But it's such a big little town, and I know you've been to Vegas. I'm sure you have many
Mm-hmm.
times. And for
Mm-hmm.
those who have never been there, it's a big little town, and what you do on the north side of the strip is found out by the south side before you even have a chance to see 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And therefore, I wanted to continue to work, and somehow alcohol just didn't seem to be that important to me that I could not live without it. I could live without it quite nicely. Now I'll have a taste of scotch, and I probably have had in 5 years, but for the most part, I guess what I'm saying is alcohol is not a very important part of my life. But I do got to have my cup of coffee in the morning. I will tell you that.
Right. I guess Vegas doesn't frown upon the Vegas bookers don't frown upon coffee because
No.
that helps you get up.
Well,
Yeah.
no, the guys that control the booking, they don't drink coffee, if you get my drift.
Right.
And
That's probably true.
they don't do a lot of things. I gotta say, as Dean Martin used to say, Pally, they don't do a whole lot for fun. I'll tell you that right now. But at any particular rate, you've written this wonderful book. And before we get into living curiously, how to use curiosity to be remarkable and to do good stuff, Becki Saltzman, you, as I said, we're going to talk about this because I had a few friends from this area here in Florida that went up there for the march on Washington in January of this year on the 21st. Take away some of your reflections from that.
Interesting. So I went to the March on Washington, and it was interesting because a lot of people said, why are you going? And I thought that was, or they were asking in this kind of, why are you going? And I took it as a very good question. And I was going for a number of reasons. One, to bear witness. Two, to participate in something that I thought was historical. And three, the third reason is probably something particularly unusual. And that is that I knew that given the fact that it was just on the heels of the inauguration the next day, right, that there would be a lot of people that I could interact with that were that were not like-minded. We keep talking about like-mindedness as a good thing, and I wanted to explore it as the opposite. So I went there to also bear witness to the people that I would consider non-like-minded as a way to test what I call one of my curiosity hacks to see if I could elevate curiosity ahead of criticism, judgment, fear, and complacency in a place that was far outside my comfort zone. So that led to one of the most kind of incredible experiences.
Before you go very far, why was that out of your comfort zone?
Well, the march itself was not out of my comfort zone. What was out of my comfort zone was a very well advertised counter march or counter group, which was the Bikers for Trump.
Oh,
and
yes.
They were there. Yeah. So they were there to counter the 800,000 plus, depending on, what number you believe, women and men that had come from all over the world to march on Washington. And I wanted to see if I could interact with them in a way that was unlike any of the other marchers, which was hostile or whatever. I wanted to see if I could actually gain insights from them. So that was one of the things that I tested, and it was a pretty unusual and amazing experience.
How did they receive you?
Well, so imagine I walk up to their group. It was a sparse group relative. I mean, anything would have been sparse relative to the, all the people in the pussy hats and the signs and that were there for the march, right?
There were probably more people at the march than there were for his inaugural.
Oh, well, I can tell you unequivocally that was the case because I was there for both, and I was there for both. So I can tell you, it didn't take a scientific survey to do that. I lived in D.C. I did a semester in D.C. 100 years ago when I was working on my thesis. So I I can tell you, just understanding the lay of the land a little bit, there was no comparison. But anyway, as you approach these bikers for Trump, there's this kind of semicircle of people in pussy hats and signs. And, there's strength in numbers. So I would say that they were more hostile toward the bikers for Trump. And the bikers for Trump were a sparse group, so they were kind of a little bit timid. And as I made my way through the people yelling and holding their signs, I went up and approached the bikers for Trump. And I just wanted to see if I could use some of the techniques from what I talked about in the book, elevating curiosity, and particularly finding uncommon commonalities to see if I could make them take a selfie with me. That was my goal. Can I get them to take a selfie with me?
Yeah.
So I at first when I approached them and asked them, they totally turned me down, and it wasn't until I tried a different technique that they agreed to take a selfie with me, and then they were lining up, and it was pretty fun.
Really?
So first I approached them and try to say, hey, listen, we're all Americans, and they would have none of it. It was just like, no. And then I said, okay, here's the deal. And a couple of years ago, I took motorcycle lessons, so I have a very important question for you. I said, crotch rocket or Harley? Which one?
Well.
And you could see that, you could see their faces melt toward this kind of connection, because it wasn't a political question. It was an uncommon commonality. We knew something about motorcycles. And that connection allowed them to come over and start lining up to take selfies with me. And it was kind of a profound experience, particularly when I didn't see their expressions until I got the pictures back, and some of them were kind of grimacing like, ooh, but still they did it.
Yeah.
And that was it, really. That spoke to the power of curiosity and really connecting with these uncommon commonalities, which is, one of the steps in the book. So
I think I do not like the president. I made that crystal clear. I never liked him 20 years ago. There's something about him that just is despicable, and he is a despicable man. And I was in Washington, D.C. myself for Watergate, and I watched John Dean recently on television. And this is the more layers that they're trying to pile on to divert attention away from Russia and the election. And while I don't think that Russia did anything to change the outcome, he is the president. I do believe they tried their best, as they are doing in Europe. But this man, unless he does an awful lot of things very quickly, I hope he gets impeached. I really do. I just and having his daughter and his son-in-law working in the White House is just despicable to me. I don't care how intelligent or successful they are. I just find this man detestable at best, and let it go at that. I don't want anything to happen to him while he's in office. I'm not that kind of person. But I guess what I'm getting to is even the people who dislike him the most have commonality with the people who love him the most. And I have found that to be true over the last couple of months with everything coming down, Becki. And, hopefully that will continue. I think more and more people are starting to say, what did I vote for? We're talking to Becki Saltzman. She's the author of Living Curiously, How to Use Curiosity to Be Remarkable and to Do Good Stuff. Do you think that while that was going on that day, and even my members of my own family were like, oh, tell them all to go get jobs and get back to work and quit protesting, the election's over, which is the Republican attitude about while people are protesting against them, they can't face the fact that, Hillary lost. Hillary lost. She ran a lousy campaign towards the end. Do you think that they paid any attention to that, and that the movement has any legs into the future?
Yeah, I think that I think that when you talk to people, and well, first of all you have to do is look across at the sign. So I kind of am always looking at experiencing something like the march for me is, I call it like half being part of the group. So like half being part of the apes and half being Jane Goodall. So I'm half participating, and I'm half, being an anthropologist looking on the outside. And so, participating for me, it felt invigorating. It felt, wonderful to be part of something. and just the sheer numbers and knowing what was happening and going on throughout the world. The Jane Goodall part of my life, which is, again, a strong 50% there, right, was trying to kind of extract insights and wisdom from the experience. For some people, posting on Facebook is, their social activism. For other people, marching on this day is their social activism. But for a smaller group of people, and I know some of them very intimately, for a smaller group of people, it was the beginning of something. It ignited something in them. And I think, if I had to look curiously at this, and again, I'm looking, like I always say, like a Jane Goodall, I would say that it ignited something in women particularly, to kind of grab the reins and say, okay, all right, I'm gonna do something. For some people it was a one and done, and there's no problem with that. Right. For some, they were 10 years old and they're going to be able to talk to their kids about the fact that they participated in something, just like the March on Washington. Right. So I think that there's the whole myriad of things, but clearly I know some people took a lot of energy from that and are going forward. And I know a couple of people that are actually running for office because of their experience at the march. Good. So, that's something legitimate. Yeah.
Good for them. Good for them. It's funny, the whole premise of this whole interview, of course, is about your book, Living Curiously. I always found it curious that a certain section of the women's movement, or the females out there, love him. He could literally do the most despicable thing, and he said the most despicable things about women, and they love him. They excuse him, and they excuse him because he's supposed to be a billionaire, and which I wonder if it's more paper than it is cash. And other people who have any common sense, they go, there's something wrong with this guy. There's something mentally wrong with this guy. It's like this weekend, he's got the Chinese president coming down to Mar-a-Lago, which is another thing about him flying down there every weekend. It's costing us money. After some of the things he said about China, how's that meeting going to go? So I would be curious, to use your term, to be a fly on the wall and see how that would go. This is when this guy eventually dies in 20 or 30 years from now, I hope they open up his brain to find out if he really was retarded. Because there's a certain don't you kind of think, as a person who uses curiosity and is interested in so many things, that you have to say to yourself, first of all, he's not curious about anything. He doesn't read. He basically reads a few newspapers and he relies on people telling him things. He doesn't really travel, in spite of owning his own private airplane, a 757. He's not interested in much of anything except real estate. And he only ran for president of the United States, I think, because of that dinner that he was at with the Correspondents' Dinner, where Barack Obama tore him apart because of the birther movement. He's really not interested in much of anything in life.
Well, I think that might. Again, remember, I live in Portland, Oregon, so that's the People's Republic of Portland. So, so I'm gonna take a step outside of the People's Republic of Portland, because it's very easy to speak in the like-minded vernacular. It's very easy here to live in our silo of sameness. And, I have to remind my husband, yes, I am, a progressive. I am a progressive, but my job requires me to dig a little deeper. So a friend of mine who's a Republican actually gave me his book, and she thought, ha, ha, ha. And I said, have you read it? And she said, no. And I said, well, I'll read it. And I did. And I don't think he's not an enigma to me. He's not an enigma to me. I didn't think he would. I thought he would win. And, people can say that after the fact, but I was very vocal about it before the fact. So I thought he would win. And the reasons that I thought he would win were not these profound prognostication, Nate Silver kinds of things. It was the insights that you get from curiosity can be profound. And in this case, so I understand, I understand that our confirmation bias, that we believe what we want to believe. We believe evidence that supports what we want to believe, and we discount evidence to the contrary.
Yes.
And, we've got these algorithms that lock us in our silo of sameness on Facebook. We don't understand the difference between fake news and biased news. So all of these things, I'm not a lover of him. So I say this, I'm not supporting, but he had every indication of running for president, and you can read it in his, this book was written like in the 80s, right? And you can hear it in his interviews with Oprah, when he had, 50 pounds ago. I mean, he had, this was part of, a dream, a plan of his. This wasn't an accident. So, I think that it's a little bit more complicated. And also I think that the fact that women voted for him, white women in particular, seems so confusing to people. And yet I think that a lot of it had to do with, and this is getting, far outside of the book, but still within the realm of curiosity. I think that we as a society have a very difficult time understanding and being comfortable with women being ambitious. It's not women being smart. It's not women being, hardworking. We have a problem with women and ambition. And it's why we embrace Elizabeth Warren as a brilliant, feisty, because she's altruistic, and it's why people recoil at Hillary Clinton, because she seems self-serving. We have a problem with women being ambitious, and yet we revere men that are ambitious. And I think that that's, something that we may need to explore a little further, within ourselves and in our society. But, that's what
they look at Hillary. They look at Hillary as a smart ass, and who does she think she is? And frankly, she doesn't come off as warm and fuzzy like she probably should have during the campaign. But the curious thing, though, that and you kind of were hitting on it there, is I also thought towards the end, although I was working, I was on the radio that night calling the election. I think he also won because he's an oddity.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, it's interesting. One of the things that I was very curious about when I was writing the book was, what is this political divide between rural and urban voters? So I actually flew to New Orleans and I drove out to a very remote part of kind of the Cajun country, and met with this woman who grew up on the bayou. And they run these kind of, not near New Orleans, the close ones, but way far out, these alligator tours and, whatever. And they kind of bring celebrities. It's kind of the celebrity version of the alligator tour that you can get right outside of New Orleans. And her brother runs the tour, but this woman that was behind the counter was the one that I was really interested in. And I started talking to her, and she was a very nice woman, and her kids swam in the bayou with alligators, and my kids played soccer in the park with fuzzy-tailed, squirrels. And she knew more about the ecology of the bayou than I knew about my, urban life here in Portland. She knew how to take care of the brackish waters and what plants to extract. She didn't need the government telling her what she could and couldn't do. And yet I have to get permission and a permit to, cut a branch off a pine tree here. So her needs were so fundamentally different from my own, because she had to take, in a lot of ways, she's a lot more self-sustaining. But my behavior impacts my next door neighbor who lives spitting distance from me, whereas she owns, acres. So we're not like some small country where we're homogenous. We're like this. Their needs are different, and it made me realize this is why we think differently. And if I grew up where she grew up, I'd probably think like her. It's not about my brain.
No.
It's not about my cells.
And that's why they want the government out of their lives, because they can do pretty well on their own. We're talking to Becki Saltzman, author of Living Curiously, and now we're going to start talking more and more about the book. But there was one question that I came up with last night. Do you think curiosity is a form of intelligence? Does intelligence and curiosity go hand in hand to a certain extent? the more curious you are, the more intelligent you are, or the more curious you are, the more intelligent you wish to be?
So, okay, so there's some science behind that. So early studies show that we are all born with different levels of curiosity. And they see this in children as young as 2 months old. But it is true, and it's just as equally true, that we all have some level of curiosity. And then it's cultivated by upbringings that help us kind of not create an unusual discomfort with being wrong, that focus on questions over answers. And it's stifled by upbringings like those children should be seen and not heard upbringings, or creating this dangerous sense of how do we avoid being wrong instead of how do we focus on trying to be right. And that's a different kind of thing, so kind of risk aversion.
Right.
But the good news is, and it really seems to not tie at all with, with intelligence as measured by, Stanford Binet or some of these traditional intelligence tests. But the good news is that it appears to be a muscle. In other words, like we can flex it and exercise it so it's there for us when we need it. It helps us give us insights and wisdom and empathy, and it helps us see things that other people miss, or we can neglect it and it atrophies and locks us in a comfort zone of certainty, right? Where we can expose ourselves to a dangerous risk of being blindsided. So I don't think it has to do, I shouldn't say I don't think. I think science and the studies of curiosity indicate and may hint at the fact that it's not necessarily correlated with intelligence, but the good news is it can be affected at any point in time, like starting today, just like going to the gym.
Right. I mean, that I'm a very curious person. I've always been a very curious person. Now, not about everything. I mean, I don't really care to know how caskets are made, to be honest with you. That's a subject I can wait for. And there's a lot of other things but I'm curious how airplanes were being made. I'm curious how there's a program on cable. It's called How It's Made, and I love to watch how gadgets are made and everything. Is there any danger in being curious? I mean, is there an inherent danger and you can go overboard with your curiosity?
Yeah. So first of all, curiosity has kind of a conflicted reputation. And, there's, when people say curiosity killed the cat, that actually has its roots in the church viewing in the Middle Ages, the church viewing curiosity as an exploration into something that we have no business poking our nose in, and keeping knowledge for the elite, and the rest is really kind of more toward dogma. So there is curiosity's reputation is, I call it, is complicated. The thing about living curiously and applied curiosity particularly isn't about an endless inquiry and a spinning or a delving into, Miss Gladys Kravitz, knowing things that are none of your business. It's really understanding when it is that you know enough. And, with our access to information, I think it's really dangerous to shortcut that. In other words, we have so much access to information, I think we can assume too soon that with all we know enough. I mean, we can search for and we can access everything except what isn't there. Only curiosity inspires the questions that generate the answers we don't yet have access to. So without curiosity, new answers will cease to exist.
Yeah, and I find some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life are extremely curious. They may not be curious about everything, but they are certainly curious about a number of things. Number one, probably their profession. Do you run across people at all, and I probably have, that are just not curious about anything? They're quite content in their own backyard, and they don't really need to know any more than what they know?
I want to be magnanimous and say, no, everyone. Yeah, the answer is yes. And some people, it is, and part of it is their upbringing. The silo of their comfort zone is, and some people haven't had the luxury, in fairness. But I think that even those people, if they could even learn to be more interested than try to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Even a simple lesson in curiosity could actually help those people who are that we kind of maybe dismiss as incurious or not as curious. But you know what, you run across those people sometimes, and then when you really delve further, you realize that they may have grown up in a children should be seen and not heard upbringing, and they can break that cycle.
Mm. We're talking to Becki Saltzman here on The Express. She's the author of Living Curiously, How to Use Curiosity to Be Remarkable and to do Good Stuff. I like that, to do good stuff. Have you always been curious since you were a child?
So I grew up in a cabinet of curiosity. So I come from a long line of auctioneers.
Oh.
So my grandfather invented the concept of a charity auction, but they were also industrial sawmill auctioneers, art auctioneers, furniture, business, machinery, office furniture. So when I was 6 years old, my parents cut my hair, dressed me as a boy, and dragged me to the first of what would become hundreds of auctions so I could learn the lost art of selling from the family. And
I think I read that.
So
I read about that in the book. I think it's in the book.
Yeah. So I come from this, I grew up in a cabinet of curiosities. So I don't know if it was, was I born that way, or was my upbringing, did my upbringing cultivate that? It was the latter.
In the book, you talk about going to I believe it's a conversion convention, what I call a waste of time, but not for you, for your research, but I find what these people do with these things, praying the gay away convention. I will preface that by saying, Becki, I don't know if there are any people in your family, and I'm sure you've met gay men and women in your lifespan. I have a sister who is, and I had an uncle, God rest his soul, that was. And I have been in show business a good part of my life. There is no way in heck that you can pray away the gay.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is I wanted to test this whole concept of elevating curiosity ahead of criticism, judgment, fear, and complacency in a place that was so far outside my comfort zone. So, to me, the whole idea of being gay being something that would be something you would want to get rid of was as foreign as the fact that I'm not even Christian. So, I didn't even know the prayers or the sins. I mean, this was so far outside of my comfort zone as I could get. So I wanted to go and see if I could go there, and rather than be snarky and roll my eyes, which would have been very easy, I wanted to see if I could actually gain insights, wisdom, and empathy in a place that was so far outside my comfort zone. So I pull up, I'm in my car, I'm kind of talking to myself, can I do this? These huge church compound, which in and of itself was foreign to me. All of these protesters are standing outside. I wanted to wink at them and say, hey, I'm with you. But I knew that if I did that, my curiosity would be crushed beneath judgment and criticism. So I went in, and I will say that the insights and the wisdom and the empathy that I was able to kind of come away with was profound. I didn't know this was a huge business.
Oh God, yes.
Business.
Oh Lord, our former Senator Michelle Bachmann's husband.
Oh,
he's gay. And he's gay. I swear to you, the man's gay, and he does pray the gay away. You can. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Becki. You can get on your knees all day long and pray to God. God made people a certain way, and having lived with two people and been around a lot of gay people, and I'm not going to say anything. You can't pray it away. You're born that way, and sometimes you learn it right away when you're young, and other times you don't. But it's so this had to be an interesting experience for you, not only discovering an industry that you didn't know about, but the fact that you're not religious in any way, shape, or form that I'm aware of. This had to be an eye-opening experience in your curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, it was profound. The thing that I realized was that for miserable consenting adults,
Mm-hmm.
And I, take children and teenagers out of this equation. But for miserable consenting adults, this place provides an outlet for them. Now, whether we, I say we meaning, someone who would have to work hard not to think it was ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we understand the benefits to these miserable consenting adults or not was kind of beside the point for me. I wanted to know if, there was if I could come away with any insights, and I did. And so that was a way to test, to prove to myself that no matter where we go, no matter how far outside of our comfort zones we go, if we can elevate curiosity and approach things with curiosity, it may not make us less judgmental, okay? But it may make us more accurate in our judgments. And given our divisiveness that we have, that we're faced with probably a higher level of divisiveness now than ever before, this may mean that being curious now is more important than ever before. So,
Yeah, because you also talk in your book about how people devote themselves to a cause, yet they haven't really learned that much about the cause that they're involved in. So, with what you just said, sometimes a better understanding, using your curiosity of what it is you don't understand or finding out more about what you do like, instead of just reading a paragraph and thinking you know all there is, may open your eyes to a better understanding of the person next to you instead of looking at them in a certain way. You state in your book, being curious allows you to gain insight into the things that you would have missed. I think that's the point you're making with that, correct?
Right. It reminds me when I was about 11 years old, my family hosted the neighborhood garage sale. And midway through the first day, this woman comes careening around the corner, crashing into our driveway and nearly crashing into my brother, who was trying to sell all of his crappy baseball cards. And this woman gets out of the car. She's disheveled. She's incoherent. And the neighbor lady who was standing there said, that if she didn't leave, she would call the police. My mother went up to the lady, asked her a question, and took her inside. Now, if you knew my mother, she was not the taking strangers into the house kind of gal, not by a long shot. So, we were all kind of like, wide-eyed. About a half an hour later, the woman came back. She was unrecognizable. She was coherent. She was put together, normal. What we had all judged to be insane, scary behavior, my mother had curiously discovered was pre-diabetic coma symptoms. And the remedy was orange juice. Yeah. And this is how I grew up. I grew up in a family that really valued curiosity, not in lieu of judgment, but before judgment. And I think that this curious question saved this woman's life.
Yeah, your mother recognized the symptoms. You also say in your book, elevating curiosity requires that you're more concerned with getting your life right than not getting it wrong. What do you mean by that?
Meaning that if you're so risk adverse that you do everything possible to not be wrong, that you do everything possible to get the right answer instead of asking another question, where you value what you think is the right answer over another question, that you live in this kind of risk adverse comfort zone bubble that you miss not only do you miss insights and wisdom and empathy, but you miss the juice of life. And I don't think that the opposite of fear is courage, and I don't think the opposite of fear is bravery. I think the opposite of fear is curiosity.
Yet with that said, I know a lot of people, for instance, and I don't mean to bring up a political thing, and I'm not talking about Trump, but people fear Muslims without ever reading the Quran, which for those of you out there that haven't, it's like reading the New Testament with a few twists and turns that make sense if you're a Muslim, I suppose, or a better understanding. And I understand what you're saying, but I also find that a lot of people, as we were talking earlier on the show, And we're talking to Becki Saltzman, the writer and author of Living Curiously: How to Make Your Curiosity to Live a Better and Remarkable Life. I find some people out in rural America, they kind of know what they know. It's sort of like, do you believe in creationism or do you believe in, Darwin's theory? They believe in creationism or they believe in Darwin's theory, and that's it. They don't investigate beyond that. And I think that's a shame, because I think if they were to go ahead and learn a little bit about Islam, they would understand that what's going on in the world is being bastardized by a group of fanatical idiots who do want to bring the world to an end. That'll happen at some point or another, maybe a million years from now. But I also find the opposite, though, Becki, and maybe you do too, that a lot of people just kind of know what they know. They don't want to know anymore. And I don't care. Islam, it's terrible. It's bad. It's bad. You know, the guy with the black kid running down the street, he's going to beat me up. He's going to kill me, stuff like that. They don't always investigate. And that's a terrible shame in our society. Do you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that the easiest thing to sell is fear. And that's why when you were talking about Trump being, an idiot, I really, it's so easy for me to slip into that because, like I told you, I mean, my life is here in People's Republic of Portland, as I said, but it really is.
Portland is a nice area. I got to tell you, Portland is a nice area.
It's fantastic. I mean, I'm a third generation native, so my kids are fourth generation native. I mean, we're in it, right? But and I've moved away and moved back. But I think the easiest thing to sell is fear. But it's exactly why I say that the opposite of fear is curiosity. But if you have not had the luxury of being taught, if you haven't been shown what you can do for your biceps and your triceps and your quadriceps and your glutes, because you've never had the luxury of a trainer or a YouTube video showing you that. It's very similar to when you haven't had the luxury of learning how to go to the curiosity gym, and how to flex those curiosity muscles. And so I don't think that I have to be careful about a superiority of, you people. I think that, you talked about, you broached the issue of Islam and the politics of that. And, I think that, no, ideology is above scrutiny. And I think that no people are beneath dignity. And, I'm curious about that. And that's not my own, that's a guy named Majid Nawaz has said that, but a Muslim who has said that. But I think all of these things really fall into the bucket of, if we are able to understand how to flex our curiosity muscles in a way that breaks our confirmation bias, we can find points of uncommon commonalities where we can connect. And my son is working on this Muslim-Jewish group, and it's kind of on campus, on college campus, on University of Oregon College campus. And and he said that before we ever talk about politics, before we ever talk about religion, we talk about fashion and cocktails and, and sporting events. We find points of interest so that we're curious. We start with being interested in the other person and finding uncommon commonalities, which is actually step 4 of the Living Curiously method.
Yes, it
is in the book. So
yes, it is.
So anyway, it has practical implications, political implications, and it has, business implications and implications for creating a remarkable life.
We're talking to Becki Saltzman, and if you want to find out more about her, go to BeckiSaltzman.com. Is that where they can order the book?
Yeah, or Amazon, any of the places that books hide out. Yep.
I love the book. I tell you the truth, I've gone through it, and I've actually been I was on the phone with my sister about a week ago when I started reading the book, and she's a psychiatrist. Strange. I have a strange family. I have a psychiatrist. I have a psychologist. I have a brother, a younger brother, Greg, who is a Greek Orthodox priest. And then I have a bunch of them that don't believe in much of anything. And I'm Jewish. So go figure where all of that kind of fits into something. Talk about curiosity.
Now that is a story.
Yes, that is a story. The curiosity that I've always had have been for biblical stories, things of history, and why I became a talk show host, getting away from the acting and the stand-up comedy and stuff that I did is because I am curious. When I contacted you about coming on the show, it's because I wanted to find out about you, and I thought, I think my listeners will be interested to find out about this lady. And by the way, for the bikers not to want to take a picture of how beautiful you are is beyond me, because bikers love to have their pictures taken with beautiful women. I can tell you that. You talk about one point at the beginning of the book, and we're not going to give away the whole book. I want people to buy this book. It will open your eyes to a lot of different things instead of just sitting around and thinking about doing things. It will literally, and you have a lot of testimonials on here to that effect, but it will really open your eyes. And the next question involves that, and that is that the mission of the book isn't to mastery of curiosity, but the practice. Thinking about difficulties in order to lubricate your mind for curiosity. What are you talking about? I mean, it's like life isn't, what you become is not the end result. Life is a journey. Is that more or less what you're trying to say here? That understanding curiosity is the practice of the journey more than it is mastering it?
Right. Well, so I in the book I talk about. Let me take a step back. Anyone can kind of get buff with their curiosity muscle. Mm-hmm. The Living Curiously method that I talk about in the book is really written for a certain kind of person. So, you're sitting there, you are sitting there thinking, is this all that there is? Is this all that there is? Okay, I'm okay with my life. I have the sense that there's something more that I can do to make a difference. I have the same desire for freedom, independence, as many of the listeners, but I suspect that I may be different. Maybe unlike some of my friends and family, I want to step off the bleachers and into the arena to make a dent in the universe. So that's really for whom this book is for, this particular book is for. Curiosity and flexing our curiosity muscles and kind of getting buff in that regard is for everyone. But I think of this book particularly for people who are interested in creating a remarkable life. And if I had to pick a quote, I would say that the Benjamin Franklin quote that says mankind is divided into three classes: those who are movable, those who are immovable, and those that move. I would say that this book and remarkability is really reserved for those who move. And that's not to indict people who don't want to do that, but you were talking about the March on Washington. It's right. For people who show up. Now, Living Curiously also, it seems very luxurious to read about all of these exotic places that I've traveled to meet with crazy, voodoo priests or gun store owners, or, going 500 feet into the center of a volcano to talk to, thermogeophysicists. I mean, that's not, it's really, Living Curiously doesn't come with a price tag. No. It really is, if you can become curious, you can find the mystique in the mundane. And then you can start extracting insights from strip malls, So that's really who it's for. But the Living Curiously method and creating the remarkable life is really for people who, as Benjamin Franklin says, people who move, who get off the bleachers into the arena to affect change.
He was one of my heroes. He was one of my heroes growing up. I love the Jerry Seinfeld one. Sometimes the road less traveled, there's a reason for it. Yeah. And knowing Jerry, it'd be, hey, come on here. One of the questions here that you supplied to me, because I always take questions from my guest, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, how social media devices have dumbed down our sensitivity and I imagine our curiosity, because everybody figures it's at your fingertips. How do you see it?
Well, I think, I think the shortest period of time, other than like the speed of light, or the fastest, the shortest period of time, right, is the time between, when I'm sitting at a light and the light turns green and the person behind me honks, or we're sitting around at dinner and someone says something and someone says, no, that's not true. And we all whip out our smartphones to prove who's right. And we've all experienced that, right?
Right.
Because right now we can search for and we can access everything. So the information gap, there's this guy named George Lowenstein. He's kind of one of the curiosity gurus out of Carnegie Mellon. He talks about curiosity as the desire.
That's my old alma mater.
It is?
Well, went there. I went there after the University of Miami. I studied theater there by accident. But yeah, I was there. As a matter of fact, my guest for my other show on my radio station here in town, Brian Baldinger, is going to be joining me on Wednesday, and he's from Pittsburgh, and he's a former NFL football player. So yeah, I have some roots in Pittsburgh.
Oh man. So curiosity has some major roots. The science of curiosity has some major roots in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. And George Lowenstein, he described something called the information gap. So he's kind of the Pittsburgh, curiosity guru. So he described the information gap as a gap between what we want to know and what we do know. Mm-hmm. And the desire to fill that gap is curiosity. So, that is, and one of the curiosity gaps that I talk about in my applied curiosity work or in my applied curiosity lab, is filling the information gap between what we want to know and what we need to know. And that's a different endeavor. And that kind of speaks to the two kinds of curiosity, because I kind of talk about two kinds of curiosity: the free range curiosity, which is the exploration, the kind of wonderment, staring up at the stars, or the childlike sense of curiosity, maybe equated to basic science. So studying the molecular structure of cells to understand the molecular structure of cells. And then applied curiosity is really using curiosity for an applied purpose, like applied science. So studying the molecular structure of cells to come up with better chemotherapy protocols, for example. So the difference in those kinds of curiosities speak to the different information gaps. So it's kind of an interesting exploration.
You're listening to The Express right here on TMV Cafe. You're listening to Becki Saltzman, my guest on Living Curiously. What is peak curiosity?
So peak curiosity is the absolute scratching, the highest kind of curiosity when your the striatum portion of your brain, the reward center is firing, and you're kind of itching to fill that information gap. And then when you satisfy, actually, it's interesting because curiosity, it turns out it activates two parts of your brain. So neuroscience has found that curiosity activates, at peak curiosity, it activates the striatum and it's and the reward center. But when it's satisfied, it actually activates the memory center of our hippocampus. So curiosity is rewarding and memory enhancing.
I find when I'm doing the research for the shows, I'm really happy. I don't know if that's what you're talking about with
reward. You feel happy?
Yeah, I feel happy. I'm like, oh wow, I just learned something new. Yeah. I didn't know that. And I learn something all the time. Being in show business, I'm a curious person, and being on the radio, I'm even more curious. But when I'm researching guests and stuff, recently I had Wink Martindale on, the game show host, and I read his book. And I went, wow, I knew he was friends with Elvis, but I didn't realize how close he was. And I didn't know this about Elvis, and I didn't know this, and I didn't know that. I love the reward of knowledge that I learned from it. Maybe that's the high I kind of get out of it.
Right.
But that makes me very happy. And we've got about 6 minutes left here. What is the minimum visible question, the MVQ?
The minimum viable question. Okay, so this.
Viable. I'm sorry.
No. The minimum viable question is the question you can ask someone. So it goes back to it is easier to be interested than interesting. And the minimum viable question is what you can use to extract the most information in order to find uncommon commonalities with someone that you don't know. And so I had tested a whole bunch of questions over the years to try to see, okay, if I could ask a question that would be, to extract the most information to satisfy being interested, what would it be? And the one that I came up with that worked best for me was, what did your childhood smell like? So Gary, what did your childhood smell like?
New furniture. My mother was an interior decorator, and aviation fuel because my father was a captain for one of the airlines.
Wow. So
and
aviation.
Yeah, and makeup because I got involved in theater young, because I got interested in girls when I was young, and I wanted to be where all the girls were, and they were all doing theater stuff. So I said, well, that's where I'm going. and that was my curiosity because I liked girls, know.
That's called applied curiosity.
Yes, I was curious, so I applied it to what I was interested in. But no, my mother was an interior decorator, and she was always, working with fabrics and materials because she learned way back. And then, of course, I flew with my dad on weekends sometimes. Well, back in the day when the passengers were in the back, I was up front in the cockpit with my dad a lot of times, and I got to know the crews pretty well. So aviation fuel and the sounds of jet engines were in my blood since the day I was old enough to know what a jet airplane was.
Oh, man, that's great. That is great.
I mean, it resulted in the fact that I wanted to be an airline pilot, but unfortunately my time in the Air Force towards the end kind of destroyed that. But that's a story for another show at some point or another. We've got about 3 minutes left here. What do you want people to take away from this book, which is Living Curiously by Becki Saltzman? Go on Amazon, or you can go to BeckiSaltzman.com. What do you want people to take away from your book?
I think that what would be best is that you can design, you have to be curious enough to design the life that you want. And you have to understand, or you have the luxury of understanding that curiosity is a muscle. And at any time you can learn to flex it and exercise it, and it will be there for you when you need it. And I think that given the fact that we are locked in our silos of sameness with kind of peak divisiveness, that it is the time to usher in the age of curiosity, to kind of bust the assumptions, to see things that other people miss, for insights, for wisdom, and for empathy. If we just elevate curiosity ahead of criticism, judgment, fear, and complacency, we're not only going to be more insightful, we could be less divisive. So that is probably my number one takeaway. That, and if you want, curiosity lubrication, weekly curiosity lubrication, you can join the Tribe of the Curious, and that will give you we have this Quick Curiosity Monday to provide weekly curiosity lube, because I think that it's the time to usher in the age of curiosity.
And one last question for you is, what have you learned about yourself through your journeys of this book that you say, hey, I didn't know that about myself before?
It's completely okay to be wrong. And not only is it okay to be wrong, but it's liberating.
Wow, that's for our society, boy. Nobody wants to admit they're wrong. I'm wrong every day, but most people don't want to. Becki, I want to thank you so much. Becki Saltzman, the author of Living Curiously, How to Use Curiosity to Be Remarkable and to Do Good Stuff. She's going to come back with us, I guarantee you, because there's so much more to cover. Is there a follow-up book to this real quick?
I don't know. I wrote Arousing the Bi-Curious. That's B-U-Y, curious. And this, I think about it sometimes, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Get this book, by the way. There's exercises in here. There's questions. It makes you think about yourself a little bit, and it might even give you a little more in-depth to learn more about yourself, which is always a good thing, I think. So thank you so much, Becki, for joining us here on The Express, and I thank you, and I probably will call you in just a few minutes after we get off the air, but thank you again for spending some time with us here on The Express.
Thank you for having me. You were awesome.
Oh, good night. Thank you all very much for taking the time to join us here on The Express. You can join me on Facebook at Gary Allen, ALAN. Go to youtube.com, Gary Allen, The Express. This program will repeat itself on our sister network with Renee, diversitybroadcastnetwork.com at 7 p.m. on Thursday night. Go to progressivevoices.com on demand, and very soon on 24/7 The Sound, you'll be able to hear my programs as well. Until next time, and we have some pretty good guests for you coming up, please do me a favor, take care of yourselves and each other.
You've been listening to The Express with Gary Allen. Join us here every Tuesday night at 10 for more captivating talk with Gary Allen. See you next time on The Express.